This video was recorded with the AverMedia Live Gamer Portable.
Skip it up and that up. You guys, I told you the Xbox One will be more powerful. There's games running at 60 frames per second. You shut both of your nipples. The PS4 has GDDR5 memory. The Xbox One has DDR3 and sucks. You PS4 fanboy, you will stare at my ass in fear. You Xbox One fanboy, you will stare at my chest hair and quiver.
Stop! All over YouTube, you have fanboys on both sides taking these Digital Foundry articles as Bible when it comes to resolution and frame rates. But before I start preaching, I went through both Digital Foundry articles and wrote down what each game for each console is running at. For the PS4 and Xbox One, I made cliff notes. So I'm going to get into those, tell you what the games are running at, and then I'll give you my 2 cents on it after I'm done with that. Alright kids, you ready? So we're going to start with the PlayStation 4. These are the games that Digital Foundry saw at E3 2013, and they analyzed them and did all their magic, and these are the results they came back with. You ready? Okay, number 1, Killzone Shadowfall was running at, they had that jungle level. They said the game was running at 25 to 30 frames per second in 1080p native resolution. Destiny was locked at 30 frames per second. Drive Club, this one's kind of disappointing, was running at only 30 frames per second at 1080p, and they said the textures look very current gen, 7th generation console, and flat. Need for Speed Rivals was running at 30 frames per second, but that was running on a PC, not on the PlayStation hardware. Knack was running at 1080p. They said the textures look muddy and blurry, and it was running at 30 frames per second with dramatic frame rate drops. Infamous Second Son, this was kind of like the golden child there. 1080p, 30 frames per second. They said the game looks gorgeous and looks to be running at double the frame rate, even though they said it's only 30 frames per second. Assassin's Creed 4, Black Flag. The multiplayer people said, they couldn't confirm it, they said it was running at 60 frames per second. The single player was running at 30 frames per second though, but they said it ran smooth, and they said it looked like it could be 1080p. It didn't have the same issues that it had when they were in the Sony press conferences going on. I remember the game locked up and froze and all that. Didn't do that on the show floor. Thief, this is a pre-alpha build, so it's as early can be. It's running at 30 frames per second. They said the frame rate's very unsteady, and they said it doesn't look all that great. In transitions, it gets very choppy. So those are the PlayStation 4 games they saw. Now let's go on to the Xbox One. Forza Motorsport 5. They actually saw that it was running on an Xbox One. It wasn't running, the whole controversy. There was PCs for the E3 2013, the Xbox One booths. There was all PCs. No actual consoles. They said Forza Motorsport 5, they saw it with their own eyes, was running on an Xbox One console, and it was running at 1080p, 60 frames per second, flawlessly on the actual hardware. Rise Son of Rome was 1080p, 30 frames per second, but it did chug from time to time and drop below 30 frames per second. Crimson Dragon, 1080p, 30 frames per second, but they said it was disappointing because the textures and all that looked very current generation. Killer Instinct, this one's not too shocking. The sports games and stuff don't really impress me. But 1080p, 60 frames per second, like I wrote in my notes here, it's a fighting game. Fighting games on current gen consoles are usually in HD resolutions running at 60 frames per second. Dead Rising 3. They said they didn't get a confirmation, but it looks close to 1080p. Very poor performance. The frame rate seemed to dip as low as 15 frames per second at times. Project Spark, 1080p, 30 frames per second. Battlefield 4, they said that the target for this game for the Xbox One is 1080p at 60 frames per second. But it was not actually running on Xbox One hardware, so they couldn't confirm any of that, and they weren't going to go by, the game running on a PC. FIFA 2014, 1080p, 60 frames per second. That doesn't blow me away at all because there's current generation sports games that run at 1080p, 60 frames per second, or at least 1080p, I should say. So those are the list of games for both consoles. So why did I make this video beyond the fact that those Digital Foundry articles are very long-winded and it takes them a while to get to the point, so I kind of did the work for you. there has been a ton of videos on YouTube I've seen of people saying, see, I told you the Xbox One, that's going to be the lead platform. There's games running at 60 frames per second, and all that extra horsepower with the PS4 is going to be useless, and so on and so forth. Now, before everyone says I'm a fanboy, if the shoe is on the other foot and there were games running on the PS4 at 60 frames per second and there wasn't any on the Xbox One, I would still say the same damn thing that I'm going to say right now. And that is, you cannot judge either way by games that aren't even running on the hardware and that are pre-alpha builds. You can't judge what system's actually going to have better performance because of that. It's ridiculous. I cannot believe, and some of the people I've seen making videos about this, I know better. So I don't know if they're just trolling or they're like, they really like Microsoft, which I don't think that's the case because I know that these people don't. But really, you're going, and especially the fact that they're just sports games. Now, I can say that Drive Club only ran at 30 frames per second in E3 2013, and Forza Motorsport 5 ran at 60 frames per second in 1080p. So that's kind of apples to apples, but the rest of the games, you can't, fighting games, really? Fighting games on current-gen consoles run at 60 frames per second. You can't go by the fact that Killer Instinct is running at 60 frames per second on the Xbox One. We won't know either way which console is going to be easier to program for, even though it's pretty much all but guaranteed it's going to be the PS4. We're not going to know real-world performance is what the bottom line is until we actually have the hardware in our homes. You can't go by pre-alpha builds and games running on dev kits to let you know what system's going to be superior. It's ridiculous. You just come on, really? I know you guys are smarter than that. I'm not really talking to my subs. I'm talking to people who are fighting about this on YouTube. Why is this even an issue now? A year from now, when the console's been out for a few months, even then, I would say it's a little bit too early. But yeah, then fine. You want to fight if there's a multi-plat game and it's running at 2 frames per second on the PS4 and 60 frames per second on the Xbox One, have at it. But right now, this means nothing. You can't judge the console's performance from these numbers from Digital Foundry. You can't do it. And don't tell me that you can. And let the war in the comments section begin. Anyway, folks, make sure to rate, comment, favorite, and subscribe. And if you have an interesting news story you would like me to discuss, private message me with a link via YouTube. And if I use your news article, I will give you a shout out in the video and feature your YouTube channel in the description. Have a good one.